Pre-production is something you probably already do to varying extents before recording your music, and while it's a really good money saver if you're paying for an engineer or studio time, it's also a really useful tool for taking control of your music. Hi, I'm Ben Whelan at Services for Songwriters, and today I want to talk about pre-production. It's not unusual for a band or an artist to take a song into the studio only to come out and find that they perhaps didn't have enough time to do everything they wanted to. It might be that they were able to record the song, but certain elements didn't sound how they were expecting, or perhaps they weren't able to develop new and existing ideas while they were there. In this video, I want to run through some pre-production techniques that might just give you an extra edge as a recording artist. Number 1, rehearsal. This might sound like an obvious one, especially if you're in a band, but when someone hits record at the top of the same verse for the 50th time, it might be something you wish you'd done a little bit more of. Learn your parts until you can play them in your sleep, and come recording day, you'll be more confident and more likely to give a stellar performance. If you're in a group or recording multiple parts yourself, use rehearsal time to work out how those parts work or don't work together. Anyone can turn up all their amps and PA in a rehearsal space and make it sound huge, but how does it sound when you turn it down? At the end of the day, as much as you want your listener to turn the volume all the way up as soon as your song comes on, it's far more likely to be the exact same volume as all the other music they've been listening to. At a medium volume, the added excitement of loudness is stripped away, and each element of your track can be heard in haunting isolation. So, turn it down and listen to how each of those individual parts interact with the song. Then, talk about how the arrangement might be improved, and how that could sound on a recording if that's where you're heading next. If you're a solo artist, try writing down all your ideas and just working through them one by one until you're either happy with the arrangement or have a clear idea of what direction you want to take. If you're confident in the bare bones of your arrangement before you go into a session, you'll be working from a more solid foundation that can then be developed and enhanced, rather than spending time uncovering and correcting potential problems as you go. Next up, demos. This is a bit of an extension of rehearsal in my view, but if you've got the facility to demo your songs before you go in for that full studio production, then you'll never regret it. This could be as simple as a well-placed phone recording your rehearsal or run-through. At its most basic, the ability to listen back to your song without being distracted by playing your instrument or singing is a great way to broaden your perspective. Not only can you listen to each part in closer detail, but you get to gain a listener's perspective on how your song actually sounds. Moving up a level, if you have access to a DAW and an audio interface, you can begin to develop ideas that you want to take into the studio, even if that's things that you wouldn't necessarily try to recreate in a live setting. If a live performance is a photo, then a record is a painting. Yes, you can absolutely capture an accurate snapshot of the song by putting a microphone on everything and just playing through the song, but you could also create a piece of art within itself in the form of a record, something that could not actually be recreated in a live setting. Whether you actually hit on what you're looking for or not, the act of exploring those extra colours and dimensions before you go into a recording session will allow you to better communicate your vision of the finished record. Next up is equipment. If you're recording guitars, the very least you should aim to do is change your strings. Not only will new strings give you a better tonal starting point, but if you've got old strings on, you might have some intonation or tuning issues. Also, if you break a string while recording and need to replace it, you're not then left with one super bright string and 5 dead, flat sounding strings. Sticking with guitars, if you're using pedals or taking your own amp, then try and work out your preferred sound or at least a preferred starting point before you go into record. Again, you can absolutely experiment and make changes once you get started, and you may need to make changes as the song comes together, but having a solid starting point works wonders. As for drums, if you can come into a session with new skins, it'll help things run a bit smoother, even more so if you know how to tune them. There's some great resources available on drum tuning, and whether it comes down to a discussion with your producer as to whether that tuning then changes to suit the style of production or the song, starting off with a well-tuned, freshly skinned kit and a grasp of what you personally like makes those moves much easier. Next up, guide tracks. Recording guide tracks isn't always the right thing to do, and in some cases it's just not possible, but in my experience, if you have the option and it's appropriate, it's worth doing. In an ideal world, you'd create this with your producer. That way you can agree a tempo, but also agree any tempo mapping if the song needs some push-pull to keep it feeling natural. It's also the perfect opportunity to fine-tune the structure of a song and flesh out any preliminary ideas in a relatively low-pressure environment. If I'm working with a solo artist, I tend to start by playing in a really basic part of the song on keys. From there, we can use that really simple keys and click track as a guide to then start building the arrangement and recording some vocals. If I'm recording a band and time allows, I'll create a similar guide track using a couple of the core instruments, so maybe guitar or bass, and just have them play through with the click. Once you're happy with that foundation of the song, you can then build up knowing that you're working on top of a solid foundation. Those guide recordings might not make it to the final mix. Sometimes they will, but they create a solid starting point for you to overdub and drop into, without putting pressure on the drummer or the entire band to nail consecutive takes at the very start of a session. Live collaborative performance definitely still has a place in recording. For instance, recording a jazz record from the ground up like this probably wouldn't make sense. Creating guide tracks is a really useful tool, but where the musicians are dependent on interaction with each other, the process you choose should reflect that. You also have the option to meet somewhere in the middle, whereby the band plays along to a click track. Some would argue this is a happy medium that allows human performance without unplanned tempo changes. Planning everything out before you go to record a track is really useful, but you shouldn't allow it to get in the way of your spontaneity or creativity. If you have the luxury, then by all means, start from scratch and develop new ideas in the studio. But if that flexibility is not quite within reach, prepare and consider the ideas you'd like to try beforehand. Chances are you'll still have spontaneous ideas in the moment, but they'll work themselves in around the ideas that you already had earmarked, giving you a much greater chance of landing on ideas that you actually want to keep. The last point I want to make is that pre-production is by no means a fix-all stage of music production. Problems will always arise, opportunities will get missed, and ultimately, no one's perfect. But by following some pre-production steps before making your next record, you might be setting yourself up for success, or at the very least ensuring the process runs more smoothly for you and your producer. Okay, time to wrap everything up. Everyone hears, interprets, and performs music differently, and that's how it should be. If you feel that a certain method of recording removes a unique you-ness when you actually come to record, then by all means you should try something different. Ultimately, whether you record yourself or work with a producer, the role of producer isn't simply to hit record and capture what happens on the other side of the mic. They're there to enable the performer by whatever means necessary. That could mean creating an environment that allows you to relax and perform in one take, or spending a few hours with you at the start, maybe creating a guide track to relieve some pressure down the line. Whichever pre-production approach you choose, if it enables better results, then it's a route worth taking. Till next time.